We can, well, yeah, we can see the room, Ann.
Okay. So as long as you can hear us.
Yep, we got you.
All right, sorry for the delay in start. There were some technical issues here, so we appreciate your patience. And like to open the board workshop. And basically there are two topics, the school budget and the building project. So Dr. Glover, I don't know if you and Rich are going to present that budget information?
Yep, it's, I will get it up here. Rich, give me a second. And with that up, then I'll let Rich speak to it.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
Here we are.
Okay. Oh, good. It's gonna let me share.
It's the second PowerPoint, Dave.
Yep,
The one on the
that one
bottom.
right there. That one's-
Let me see. Yeah, it looks like that's the larger one.
All right.
All right.
20
Good
slides.
evening,
20
everybody.
slides, right?
Yeah, that's it. All right. Good evening, everybody. What I tried to do is put together some information on the budget to try to fill everybody in as to what's going on in the world of financial issues with the legislature and the governor's office. Talked about some of the things that are going on in the budget. Put together a three-part budget to make it a little bit more user-friendly. I went through a couple of scenarios that I'm going to show you how different things will play out in terms of the budget, and then kind of wrapped it up. I apologize for the lateness of this. I had put together about 4 or 5 slides, and then I had an opportunity to speak with Ann on Monday. She showed me some other formats. We had a really good discussion and some really good question and answers going on about some of the things in the budget. So I tried to whip up something that would answer not only Ann's questions, but everybody else's questions, present the information in a way that was a little bit more user-friendly, and hopefully provide you with a little bit more information than I would have with those first couple of slides. So we'll go on to the next slide, Dave. All right, so we're going to talk about the state budget. This is right off the governor's office, so I want you to understand the environment that the state's in right now. We all know COVID's had a dramatic impact. And some of these numbers, when we look at the revenue coming into New York State, it's down about 11.5 billion for this fiscal year of 2020 or for 21. It's projected to be down another 9.8 billion in 22. So the state, while some of the recent numbers say it's coming back, it's still we're still in a pretty dismal fiscal cycle here in the state. The New York State has asked the federal government to help close the $15 billion budget gap. What that means is that our expenses are $15 billion higher than our revenues. And that's pretty significant. The current budget, the budget that the governor put out a couple months ago, expected $6 billion from the federal government, which still leaves about $11 billion gap. When we talk about federal aid coming in to help us out, when the governor put his budget out, he did include some of the federal aid that was coming in, but he also offset that by taking some of the state aid back. So net, we didn't get as much as we had expected. Okay. You go on to the next one, Dave. So now, after the governor put out his original budget, the legislative bodies put out their one-house budget. And basically everything that the governor had kind of put in, they've kind of kicked out. They look to increase school aid by about 5.7 billion, which is about a 20% increase over the governor's budget. They look to increase foundation aid by 1.37 billion. The governor had suggested a significant cut to the STAR reimbursements. Right now, every dollar that we lose in STAR, the STAR credits that we give our residents, the state was reimbursing us. The governor's budget had that down to 75 cents. So we would have lost a significant amount of money in our STAR reimbursements. That was restored, or at least that's in the proposal by the legislature. 500 million to fund statewide full-day pre-kindergarten. The federal government has come in at $9 billion in relief to New York State. That's $3 billion more than was planned by the governor's budget. What's going to happen with that money and how that is going to be distributed is still up for negotiation. I know some people have heard that number, $878,000 that the press release said last week. That was just a press release. Those numbers have not come out from any other legislative body. In fact, those numbers that came out in the press release, there were 3 schools who were getting money on that list who are no longer in existence. So I have a feeling there's some noise in that number, and there's going to be some significant changes. But the good news is it looks like we have a possibility to have a little bit more money than we were going to get through the governor's budget. Okay. All right, so some budget givens, some just information. Our employees' retirement system increased to 2.15%. Teachers' retirement system saw a 2.64% increase. Transportation had a 36.22% increase. And obviously debt services with the large bond payment saw a significant increase year over year from a budget perspective. Okay. So some of the budget drivers, obviously we've talked about it a lot. This initial bond payment that we're going to pay in June of next year is going to have a significant impact on our year over year budget. In addition to that, we did see an increase in revenue, but not as much as we should have. The bond payment alone should have generated about $1.1 million in revenue, but we're only seeing a net increase of about $500,000 in revenue, and that's because of the state pulling back some of their funding. So if that changes, we may see a little bit different revenue numbers, but right now that's where we're at. We know about the impact on COVID, and we've seen some increases across the board in program, capital, and administrative spending. So now what we're going to talk about are the 3 different parts of the budget. I broke it up into this 3-part format that I think some of you are familiar with. Here's just some of the definitions when we go through the administrative component that you can kind of look at. But when we take a look at the administrative component, you can go on that next slide, Dave. This breaks it all down. This is directly from WNCAP. In accounting, it's a little bit different than the real world. Administrative makes up about almost 9% of the budget, and that minus isn't good. That means that we are $54,000 over last year's budget. Some of the big drivers are BOCES numbers. BOCES numbers have started to increase a little bit as we start to use their service. The good news about the BOCES numbers is that we get reimbursed by about 60%. So even though those numbers are high, a lot of those numbers are going to come back to us at the end of the year. Okay, go ahead, Dave. When we look at the capital component, again, not as big of a part of the budget as everything else, and that big driver is the bond payment. Everything else isn't really too bad. The maintenance of the plant, there's a little bit of money that I put in there for a potential item that we may need, but everything else is pretty much flat. And the real big driver again is that bond payment. Okay. The ProCam component, about 85% of our budget. And as we see, we're year over year, we're about $137,000 higher. So our proposed 21-22 budget as it stands is about $137,000 higher. When we look at it, contract transportation, that's up $40,000. We have 2 old buses that are about 8 years old, coming close to 100,000 miles. The repairs are becoming significant. So we're looking to replace those buses with bus leases. We looked at district transportation. There's a little bit of an increase with the athletics, and part of that has to do with some of the budgets that were put in last year with COVID. The budgets were drawn down quite a bit because we weren't sure we were going to have sports at all. So I had to bump some numbers up back to pre-COVID. An example would be officiating. Prior to COVID, I think it was budgeted for about $25,000. Last year, it was budgeted for $12,500. If we're able to come back to school normal, which I'm hoping and assume we do, and sports are going to be kind of as the status quo, or at least as normal as it gets, and we start to have regular fall sports, that number is going to have to come up. There's also some numbers in there for some uniforms that had come up on a 5-year cycle that weren't budgeted significantly last year, so that's why we're seeing some of the big increases there. The guidance is $58,000. That has to do with the way one of the positions was budgeted. And again, occupational ed, that's a BOCES number coming directly from BOCES. Questions, thoughts, comments? All right. We got to the next slide. All right, so budget proposals. Now, we've looked at a couple different things. Here's the state of our budget, and we have a couple of proposals up there. And in addition to where the budget is today, we realize in the principals, it can jump in, and Dave can jump in on this as well. We've got some concerns, especially with COVID and the fact that a lot of students haven't been back into school full time. So we're looking at different ways that we can help better prepare children to come back into the fall, and for better ways to help them when they do come back in the fall. Is that correct? Anybody want to throw anything else in there? All right, good. So basically, we looked at a summer remedial program. We looked at a couple different scenarios, basically bringing some students into summer school. These are going to be, I believe, elementary school students, as the high school will be shipped out to Cambridge. So there's a mix. The elementary, we're going to come in-house, I believe, to Salem. We looked at a scenario where the high school students went to Cambridge. The cost of the program is about $59,000. And again, we want to help bridge those gaps. We want to help, we saw the report that came out last week with the number of students who are struggling and who are on the verge of pass-fail. So we want to help those students get into a good spot for the fall. And obviously the goal is academic success. We want to add an additional position to replace the CSE department chair. Right now we have a department chair. It's a part-time position. What's nice is that money is already in the budget. So it's not going to be a year-over-year increase. It was budgeted for somebody to fill a spot that was never filled. So we have an opportunity to replace that particular position or another position that kind of fills the same purpose. But I think this is a good opportunity. Again, we have the money in the budget to fill that position or a similar position. We can talk about what that's going to be called or what type of position we want, but we have some monies in place to fill a full-time position.
Could I just add something about the summer school for secondary?
Please do, please do.
So just something to add. So in the past, we've had summer school at Cambridge. Last year, we participated in a summer school online. Summer school, there was no in-person summer school last year, and it was a regional program. This year, we're referencing Cambridge. We're not sure what the options will be regionally. I am in discussions with our regional principals group, and we are working with BOCES on the possibility. There may be a regional summer school through BOCES, so we're not 100% sure that would be through Cambridge. It could be a regional option. In the past, we have asked families to pay that cost, and we would often transport, depending on the year and the number of students and where they chose to take the class. But with the number of students that are struggling, we're concerned, and also with the economic situation, that would discourage students from getting their credit recovery in the summertime and could put students then behind and not on track to graduate in 4 years, depending on how many courses they need remediation in. So that is a new cost for us at the secondary level, even though we have had summer school in the past. And there would also be, obviously, transportation costs involved in that as well. So I just wanted to clarify that we're not exactly sure the location for those of you that may be watching at home. But those are the the discussions right now. Thank you.
No, thank you. All right, we can hop on to that next slide, Dave. And then finally, for the fall, the both elementary and high schools are looking for additional help in a couple particular areas, math, special ed, ELA, and again, a math for the high school. There's a lot of rationale. Again, I don't know if you folks want to jump in and talk about that as well. But, you know, obviously, these two, you know, when we talk about math and we talk about English, we talk about their drivers for all the other classes. So what I did is I put some cost analysis together, looked at the cost of teachers from a full-time perspective, and basically we added benefits and that type of stuff. And we're looking at about $400,000 for these 4 positions. Okay. You on to the next one? All right, so budget reductions. Now, we've talked about the stuff that we're looking for. Over the past couple of weeks, we have all been scrubbing the numbers in our budgets, trying to find a couple dollars here and there that we can kind of bring this budget down to help us get to a position where we can kind of support the additions we're looking for. We went through and we were able to bring out about $60,000 in some of the BOCES operational spending. You're not going to see any effect from the student level. These were just, these were purchases that we had made last year that we don't think we need to make this year. We're not taking away any services. We're basically, the students won't be affected by this at all. It was just things that we were able to see that we didn't necessarily need. We've got about 10,000 masks at the school, so we don't need to buy 10,000 more next year, hopefully. I went through all the operations budgets. We were able to take out about $5,000. We looked at the maintenance equipment. We took that out. We went through the high school and the elementary budgets, and we were, everybody did a really good job of kind of finding ways to save a little bit of money. So over the past couple of weeks, we were all able to come up with about $88,000 in savings from when the original budget was posted 4 or 6 weeks ago. Okay, great. Let's see what's next. All right, so now I want to paint a picture with the revenue. So again, here are our debits, and this is kind of what we have kind of in the bank. We've got cash, we've got New York class cash. Now, there was a couple questions asked about what we do with the money and the cash that we have on hand. I know that we had looked at the revenue picture the last time we spoke last week, and we saw that interest was significantly lower this year than it had been in the past. And we were looking at different ways that maybe we can put stuff in different accounts to maybe increase the interest that we were earning. Unfortunately, the law is very, very specific about what accounts we can use. We can't use any type of CDs because we can't tie up any of this money. And essentially, we can't put this money at any kind of risk at all. So our options are basically savings accounts and maybe enhanced savings accounts that will pay us a little bit more interest because of the amount of money that we're holding in them. And if anybody else has a savings account like I do, they're not paying very much interest. So these are basically, we have cash. It's all our cash accounts, our accounts receivable, what's due still from the state and federal government. Basically what we're going to be looking at in terms of encumbrances, what we have earmarked, future expenditures, that type of stuff. Okay. Next slide. Also on the revenue pictures are basically our reserve funds. So we look at accounts payable, that's at 0 due to other funds. And this is a typical kind of revenue picture. These are our debits. And we can see at the bottom, as we work our way down, we have deferred revenues. We have reserves due to, these are monies that we know we're going to have to pay to the employees' retirement system, to the state teachers' retirement system. We have reserves for encumbrances. These are our expenses that have been earmarked already, but we haven't paid. Retirement contributions. So basically, we have a reserve account. This is one of the reserve accounts that we're using. We have about $894,000 in a retirement reserve that we've been using $180,000 of out of the past couple of years. This is a little bit overfunded. So, basically, our expenses from the retirement reserve are about $275,000 a year. So we're definitely a little overfunded, so we can take some money out to continue to pay the retirement portion of our budget. The TRS contribution's a little bit lower, insurance reserve. This is basically in case we have some type of serious accident, we have a little bit of a buffer. We have reserved employee benefits. Again, should we have a bad year where revenue doesn't come in, we have a buffer for that. The assigned appropriated fund balance, these are the revenues that were assigned to this fiscal year's budget back in the budget build last year. So there were a couple things, and I think I have that on a couple of slides, or maybe the next slide. Basically, there was $457,000 roughly that we used to not to increase the tax levy, $300,000 for some flyers and that kind of thing. So that's the money that we had taken out of our budget or out of our reserves to use as a potential source of funding this year. Right now, we're still a couple months out. That assigned appropriate fund balance is the funding of last resort. We don't touch that money until the very end. So if we don't, basically if we come in under budget, meaning we don't spend everything that we had planned on it, or we come in with a little bit more revenue than we expected, we don't necessarily have to use that. Right now, it's probably a 60-40 that we aren't going to use it. And as we get closer every day, I feel a little bit more comfortable than that, but it's really hard to tell considering we still have got a couple months left in the school year. Okay. All right, Dave. So the revenue takeaways, again, our state aid is negative year over year. So last year we got a little bit more state aid than the governor had proposed. I think that's going to change, but there has been no commitment on that. The legislature, the one house wants to make that change. The governor doesn't. We'll see how it kind of pans out. They're trying to get an on-time budget this year, but it's going to be very, very close. They've got a lot of work to do, so we'll see what happens there. The building aid from the capital project, we're expecting about a little over $1 million in aid from the capital project. So again, that's going to cover most of the bond payments. So most of the bond expense is going to be covered by the building aid that we get for that particular project. Again, the biggest reduction in revenue. Oh, yep. Go ahead. Biggest reduction in revenue is that for this year's budget, we've basically lowered the amount of reserves being used, which we have to kind of take a look at, and I'll explain later. But again, the $885,000 that we used in this budget was for a levy reduction, a budget brochure, and basically assigned from encumbrances. And again, for next year's budget, we're using about $211,000, which is just about a $600,000 reduction in revenue. Okay. Now, what I did is I took the different scenarios. I want you to understand how, as we add things, it changes the composure of the budget. So if we didn't have to use the bond, if we didn't have to pay the bond this year, which we do, basically we'd be looking at about $240,000 increase year over year, or about 1.7%. The issue becomes our budget gap, and that budget gap is $793,000, which means right now our expenses that we're anticipating for next year are almost $800,000 more than our revenue. So while the budget only went up 1.7%, we have a significant budget gap that we're going to need to address. Okay. Now, the next scenario, I included the bond. And again, we're going to see the budget that was 2021. That's going to stay the same over these next 4 slides. When we add the bond in, our dollar change is now about $1.35 million, which is a significant dollar change, but it's strictly coming from the bond. The biggest change comes in the percent change year over year. So our budget year over year goes from 1.7% now to 9.58%. That's a very high year over year budget increase. And our budget gap increases to about $858,000. So right now, this is where our budget currently sits. We have about an $858,000 budget gap that we've got to figure out. And we've got essentially 2 choices. We can look to some of our reserves to fix that. We can look at decreasing some of our expenses, or a combination of both. And we'll talk about that later. I think that's what we're going to discuss. Now what I did is I went and looked at the future. If we wanted, what would happen if we added summer school, and if we wanted some summer remediation, if we added the teachers in the fall. With the increase in the summer program, we see the percent change, the year over year budget change go from 9.58 to 9.99, just about 10%. So if we add the summer in, we get to about a 10% year over year increase. And our budget gap now becomes $917,226. And then finally, if we look at adding the 4 positions in the fall, our budget change now is a 13.55% year over year, and our budget gap becomes $1.42 million. And that's what we're looking at from a financial perspective. So those are the 4 different scenarios we have. That's where they break out financially. That's just how the numbers play out. And so I think we got one more slide. Some takeaways. Every budget scenario has a year-over-year increase. And I know that the taxpayers aren't necessarily used to seeing some of these high numbers. Minimally, we have an $858,000 budget gap that we're going to have to figure out. All right. Budget gap needs, they can be covered by a combination of expense reductions or the use of reserves. And again, early projections are that we're going to come in under budget and we may have a little bit more revenue than expected. So that's good news. It's not 100% guarantee. It's just how we're trending now. Something could happen tomorrow that could change that, but I feel confident that the money that we assigned in the fund balance reserve this year may not be touched. And what that means is that money is going to roll over next year. I think we have $1.6 million in the unallocated reserve fund, and that hopefully at the end of the year will increase a little bit more if we don't use all of our budget and we come in a little bit higher in revenue. The good thing about all of this, the good news and what we can go out to the taxpayers with, is that we are not increasing taxes this year. We don't really have that option. We're not going to do it, and that's a good thing. So it's a good thing for them. For us, it means we have to figure out how to close the gap without a tax increase. Questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a couple, just so I'm clear, we really have 3 options, not 4 options, correct? I mean, that first one, I mean, I guess we could kick that on to the next year, but as we talked before, that doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, and we're in that same position next year. So I just wanted to, what I want to impress upon people is that year over year, it's only a 1.7% increase. And if we're going to take this big increase out to the voters, which we're going to have to do, those are some of the talking points we're going to have to make. And we explain it to them that even though we're seeing a big increase from the bond payment, we're also seeing a big increase in revenue to cover that. So I think we have some talking points. And if we use the budget flyer correctly and we get this information out to the voters, I think we have some talking points to help them understand the process and how it works. So you are correct. We really only have 3 options.
Now, I guess I do have another question. I mean, there are, just so I'm clear,
Sure.
that so you're saying we're not increasing taxes. I mean, that there are districts who are planning on taking that approach, correct?
Yeah. Well, our the tax cap levy right now only allows us to increase by 0.7%. So the most we could raise taxes is about $32,000, which isn't going to impact our budget gap really at all. So I think if we're going to go out with a high, my opinion is if we're going to have to go out with a high increase, why, it's not, that $32,000 isn't going to make a lot of difference. So I think it's better off that we don't increase taxes this year, and use that as a message to help us sway voters with that big percentage increase.
I guess I'm just trying to be clear about what a recommendation is versus what all the levers are that we can pull.
Yeah, I mean, basically.
I'm not advocating for anything. I just want to make sure we're all clear on those.
Yeah, if we go out at the max tax levy, it's going to generate about $32,000. Anything after that is over the tax levy, requires a super vote, and I don't think any of us want to go down that path. So,
I'm not arguing that we do. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page that is a lever we could pull.
yeah, yes, yep.
Rich, could you go back to the capital component, please? The 6.3% 3.4% of the budget. And you have a transfer to the capital fund. The actual one was 1.8 for this year, and proposed is 2.9, almost $3 million. Can you explain what that is?
What's that? What are we looking at?
The $1 million change in the transfer to the capital fund.
The $1 million change? Yeah, that's the bond payment.
Okay,
That's the total,
So-
that's the
so we
total
are-
capital.
so we're using the money in the capital reserve
No. This is the reserve, capital reserve is a revenue source. This is the expense component of the budget. They're two different things. So this means right now that if we pay the bond, we're gonna have to pay, a specific, basically between our bond payments and some of the other payments, in terms of the serial bonds, we're gonna basically have to come up with about $1.2 million. It's an expense. It has nothing to do with the revenue. It has strictly to do with the fact that we're gonna have to write a check sometime this fiscal year to cover that band and that first bond payment, or the next fiscal year to cover the band and the bond payment.
But are we offsetting it? Are you showing it in the revenue with a transfer from the capital reserve accounts that we currently have?
So we don't have, so we can go back to some of there isn't necessarily a transfer. It will be offset by the money that we get from state aid. So there is an offset to the bond payment by state aid. Now, that's our decision. If we want to use reserve funds to cover some of this, that's a decision that we're going to have to make. But I know somebody had mentioned, we looked at that $1.9 million in that New York State cash special reserves. That's borrowed money. That's the band money that we borrowed. That money is going to be used very quickly because every time a bill comes in from the capital project, it gets paid out of this money. And my guess is sometimes by July, that money is going to be gone. We cannot use that particular money for anything. The cash is going to be used to cover basically all of our day-to-day expenses. So if we want to use any money to cover, what's that?
No, I was
If we want
not
to use any
talking
money
about
to
that
cover
money.
our budget gaps, it's going to have to
We have
Okay.
$1.2 million in a capital reserve account that we can draw down based on the proposal that was put before the voters. So it stands to reason that this would be a reasonable
where is
way
that
to
one?
spend that money. We have a capital reserve account that's funded at $1.2 million.
I don't know where that 1 point.
That's already been expended. It was expended up front at the beginning of the year. When the project started, the $1.2 million was used up front to delay any loan, any borrowing we
Tina told
have
me
to.
yes on Monday that exists and is still funded.
Who was telling us that?
The treasurer.
That money is not there. It was spent at the beginning of the project. These two revenue pieces are everything that we have. There's nothing else in our system. That money, when I went back and looked at some of the original dollars, that money was supposed to be used upfront payment. And I wasn't here when this whole process went into place, but part of the process was we had a little bit of money. I think there was money that came from the state. There was money that was used from the reserves, and that money was used up front. Right now, we do not have a big coffer to offset that cost. Any of the monies these are the list of the reserves right now that we have. And these are the reserve funds that we use. These are the funds that not any. Basically, the only fund that we project is the
Your audio is cutting
unassigned
out and
fund
having
balance.
trouble.
All right.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said, the audio was garbled. Could you repeat that? Do we have no audio?
I think he froze.
Can you hear me a little bit better now?
Video. We heard that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Try turning off your video. That may help with your audio.
Can you hear me now? How about now?
Yeah.
Heard that, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Anybody? Okay.
Can you
So-
not hear us?
Can you
So
hear us?
to answer your question, I can hear you guys, yes.
Okay.
So to answer your question, when we look at the revenue picture, if you go down to the next slide, Dave, down to slide 14, these are the reserve funds that we have on slide 14. Some of them are very restricted, meaning we can only use those funds for particular items. And quite honestly, I had a conversation with Lynn about this, and we talked to Tina. She helped me understand some of those numbers up top, but these are our reserve funds that we have. That's it. And the unassigned fund balance is the only one that doesn't really have a lot of restrictions. This comes directly out of WinCap, directly out of our financial system.
I'm just trying to match up the pictures, the print's so small on the screen. I'm not
The second page.
looking at the second one.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Doesn't show capital account.
No, I'm quite confident that when we started at the beginning of the project, we used the $1.2 million on hand to begin the project and take care of the paperwork pieces we needed to do to get things up and running, to delay any borrowing we would need to do as a savings against interest costs. So those funds have been, I'm quite confident those funds have been expended.
Just that Tina said that it had money in it when I was there on Monday. So I'm not sure, maybe we were talking about different things. Because it's not even listed.
Right,
Even
everything, yeah, that's why I didn't understand where the disconnect was. We don't have a capital fund. I think she was talking about that New York class fund that we had money in, but we don't. That's money that's been earmarked to pay for the bills. Tina thought we were talking about the unassigned fund balance.
Okay, that's not the reserve account. Okay.
That's a reserve account that's used specifically for the bills that come in for the project. That's a cash account. It's not a reserve account, it's a cash account. That cash is actually sitting there in the bank, but it's earmarked for project bills as they come in until we get our long-term financing situated.
All right, so if we have expended the money that was in our capital reserve, and we're looking at how much we want to bond, can we make up the
Yes.
difference? So that would be using the money that we had expended from the capital account. We can roll it into the bond?
Roll whatever the bond is going to go out for whatever bills that we have to pay. On May 1st, we're going to get hopefully a list of all the bills that are going to come due. And that's going to total right now roughly about $17 million, which means we have to issue a bond for $17 million to pay for them. If you want to use reserve funds to cover some of the budget gap, we can. But you can't erase an expense with a revenue source. We can increase our revenue. Quite honestly, we're going to have to. Because right now we have a $858,000 budget gap. So we have to pay that expense. And we're going to have to find a way to come up with $858,000 either through using our unassigned fund balance or by decreasing expenses.
Now, just a moment ago, you were talking about the unassigned fund balance and said that was earmarked. That's not officially earmarked, that's just.
The
would be allowed to
unassigned, the assigned fund balance was used as a revenue source for this current fiscal year. There's a cash reserve that's earmarked for paying some of the short-term bills that come in. Right now, we have retirement, we have certain reserves that are specific and can be used for certain things. The only thing that we can use pretty much for anything is the unassigned fund balance. Right now, that's at $1.66 million.
Yeah, I guess I followed everything you just said, but I'm not sure to answer my question, which was, before you could, I thought you were, in reference to the unassigned fund balance, just talking about what it was earmarked for. I was just asking.
If I did, I misspoke. The unassigned fund balance isn't earmarked for anything. That's
Okay.
cash that we have that we can use to cover
For
budget
expenses.
shortfall. Yeah, pretty much. It's the reserve fund that doesn't have any restrictions. Yes.
Yep.
Any other
Just for clarification
Yeah, go ahead.
on your revenue takeaways, the information that we were provided last year, the $350,000 was
Yes.
not for a budget brochure, it was for appropriated fund balance?
When I looked at the notes that I received from Ann, and when I looked at the notes, I think even on the budget worksheet, um, at the end of the day, it was put in as one transaction through WinCap. It was basically we're using $858,000 from the reserves. There was a handwritten note on a piece of paper that I believe John had put together, and those were the three buckets that he put it in. So and this was done last year before I was here. So I looked at that number. That's the three numbers that he had broken it down to in handwriting on the piece of paper that he had used to put into the system. So that's what I am conveying now. So for some reason, those were the three numbers that were put on a particular hard copy when this budget was being discussed last year. I don't know if that's exactly where it went, but it said budget brochure. I had a question about that myself. That had to be a very, very nice budget brochure. So if that's a typo, I understand.
They weren't that nice.
I believe it to be assigned fund balance.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, it's a sign, it was and is a signed fund balance. And it's probably still in that area. Because I can tell you here quite confidently that they didn't cost us $350,000. So
Was this a little
Board,
bit
here's-
better format for everybody? Is this a little bit better format than the past that provides a little bit more information? If you have any feedback, please send me an email or give me a call. I'll be happy to listen. Please do.
No, I guess the only piece for me would just be I tend to have more time to get ready for meetings over weekends. And so it's just, again, the timing here, and I realize this was a fairly short turnaround from our
Yeah, and
last week's meeting.
Yeah, I do, and I apologize. And again, I had a couple of slides, and then when Ann and I sat down, I got a better understanding what you were looking for. So I thought I'll pull it together real quick and put it in. And if we got a time to use it, fantastic. But I understand, everybody has a lot of stuff to do outside here, and I'll really work hard to make sure these numbers are to you much sooner than they were this week. So.
Heidi, Jackie, can you hear us? Do you have any questions so far?
I'm good so far. Thanks, Ann.
Okay.
Yep, I'm all set. Thank you.
So, board here, herein lies as our challenge for this, and it's just the growth of the expense in the budget. Because it's that $1.2 million, revenue is coming in to cover part of that in the form of state aid. So it's not necessarily a question of covering the expense, it's just the size of the jump. If we were to not have any other needs, we would take that aid number, which would cover about $1 million of that $1.2 million. We would probably apply some fund balance to the remainder of that $1.2 million from whatever reserve or wherever we chose to. And we would have what we'd have for an increase, a very simple explanation of first year of the bond payment, this is the first payment that's coming up. That's why the increase is so big. Here's where the money is coming from to pay for all of this, and this is what your tax levy is going to be for this year. So it's coming from state aid, it's coming from reserves, and it's a 0% tax increase, and that would be likely, unless there was, could be it in building the budget. Our challenge is we have other needs. Now, the CSE chairperson's position is a need. So we need to decide how the board wants to handle that structure. Had a couple conversations, had an initial conversation about it at the last meeting, where there's thoughts on I suggested and recommend that we go back to the administrative model. Been some conversations about, going to a psychologist model, and then having a psychologist pick up part of the CSE. Is another model that has been chatted. Of course, we could try to find a stipended position, try to keep it a stipended position too, for that to happen. So that's step one. We have part of those funds already in the budget. So that's not going to be a huge increase on top of what's already there, and probably could cover the remainder with a fund balance piece if we needed to, or it's small enough where we could see if there's any other low-lying fruit and do the reduction to make it balance out. So that piece isn't as big of one. We just kind of have to determine the structure so we can make sure we get the right numbers into the budget. It's this kid support piece that's the challenges. The summer school piece is an expense we normally don't have. Now, listed as $60,000, it's not the world's largest expense but it's still an increase in an expense. And as you know, kind of like when we were talking earlier about trying to reduce things out, pennies turns into dollars, turns into hundreds, turns into thousands. Well, expenses work the same way. So there's that piece. Then there's the next school year piece. And philosophically, I agree with the principals that a more structural change to what we're doing and basically looking to create smaller support classes for students who need it after our COVID experience to help pick kids up from where they are and get them closer to where they should be or where we'd like them to be at a more efficient rate is a good idea. Yeah, they could be on the roof. It's there. So that's the suggestion of another math AIS person at the elementary that gives us 2 reading and that gives us 2 math. The suggestion of the other teachers with the other 2 balances off math and ELA along with the reading teacher we currently have at the high school. All very valuable, all makes a ton of sense. Could we explain that one too? Yeah, I think we could. But then that expanse between where we were last year and where we are this year becomes more difficult to explain. And where's our community's tolerance going to fall for how much we're going to spend versus where needs are? Because there's a certain level of expectation in the community that we're going to have something ready for kids next year to help provide additional supports. Mental health pieces, we have a bunch of mental health pieces in places, and we've been working hard to get that spectrum of support surrounded kids for the mental health piece. They're going to need it academically now too, at least for the foreseen future. Maybe it's not maybe it won't be as big of a concern, but that's the challenge. It's how big or how do we want that expense to jump in 1 year? And then when we get to where we think we're comfortable, how do we want to address it? Because if we're going to make that jump bigger, I don't think we want to put fund balance on all of that. That could get us into some trouble down the road. But we also don't want to cut. We got to be kind of judicious on what we reduce in order to help keep those, prevent the expansion from going too far. Now, as Rich pointed to, we may be getting some more aid in. Legislature is kind of queuing that it's looking to give more than the governor's budget did. And if that happens, that will help us with the fund balance side. Because rather than having fund balance become the revenue to cover our expense, we'll pull out the fund balance and we'll put the state aid in its place. So federal aid, more federal aid could be coming in, and we could do the same thing. Pull more of our money out from the fund balance, more of that being federal money, so we don't have as much. We're still going to have to look out for the cliff a couple years down the road. Rich has got some preliminary work on that, so we can talk about it. That's there, but right now we just need a comfort level. How big of growth of the budget is too big? What do we want to do with CSE? How much do we think we can handle this year with the supports from the summer and into the next school year? And then what's our tolerance, and then what's our tolerances for additional fund balance versus additional reductions? When we have that information, then we can go on and pretty much tack up what the rest of the budget will look like and be ready for, one more look from the board and when it's comfortable for board action.
What, as far as the summer programming is concerned, $60,000 is a really low number for services K-12. What does that actually cover?
For that, I'll refer you back to the plan that was in the last meeting.
We didn't talk about that.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that, but that's where those numbers are coming from. So it talks about us having our own program here that will work in conjunction with, Lunch, Learn, and Play and the programs they're planning. So it's our own program here, and it also includes that secondary piece for transportation and getting kids into classes. It may not. Last year, part of our conversation is, does it make a ton of sense to do summer school remotely? I tend to agree with that, but for some kids, if it's a credit to get them through, so that number could adjust. If the only way for that student to get that algebra credit he or she needs in order to graduate next year can come remotely in the summer, and they want to do it, we want to give them a chance to swing the bat. Give them a chance. But for younger kids, I personally don't see how a remote summer anything is going to be beneficial for kids after a year's worth of remote learning or in a hybrid model. And I felt that way last year too, is that we're not going to do a third of the year remotely and then do summer remotely. We need to be able to get people together, and that's where conversations with Lunch, Learn, and Play, and they came up with a literacy program that they did last year.
And those numbers are based off of, I think, I ran a couple scenarios with 4, 5, and 6 weeks. We also looked at the staffing needs as the number of students, especially in elementary, came in. So there's a portion of that summer piece that is transportation. We looked at we put together a number of students who would be going out of district, whether it's Cambridge, BOCES, or whatever. We used a number that we felt comfortable could be interchangeable with those students. As well as a labor number, labor component for anything we did for elementary in-house. So that's where I came up with those numbers. 3.5 hours a day for 4 weeks, I believe.
Oh, okay.
So I just wanted to add about the high school, summer school component. We did project a little bit on the high side. I think, we just had the third quarter progress reports. I can take a look at that. That number maybe, so I think our projected high school cost was around 21,000. And that was a little on the high side based on the number of failures. We did look at the students who most likely would qualify. So usually students have to have a 55 average or higher in the course. And then really just looked at those core graduation requirement courses, not looking at electives. The thing Dr. Glover mentioned about doing a remote, we do have remote credit recovery options that we can purchase through BOCES, where there's another, those are somewhat online courses, so they don't require a teacher to be in front of you that I have to, I'm going to go and be in front of the biology teacher at Cambridge or another regional school. But I will tell you the estimated cost that we're using is $240 a course for the in-person summer school. Those credit recovery courses run anywhere from $500 to $740 for a semester course. So it actually, those online courses are more costly. Again, we have not done that before. It is an option to continue to go with the family will pay, but I just think that we do have a history of here, as in most places, that often families are not able, the cost prohibits them from going, and the student then ends up coming back and repeating the class. So just putting full disclosure is that, that sometimes, especially with if English or social studies is the course, those courses can set students behind for graduation. The other option is I could cut down and just estimate how many English or social studies courses, and we could only possibly offer to pay for those. If a student has to repeat a science or a math class, they have 4 years to get 3 credits. So realistically, if a student couldn't go to summer school and self-pay, then they have room, they have 1 year where they could repeat 1 course. So that is something that we could look at.
Thank you. So do you have a list of questions you want us to go down, or how do you want to?
Well, I think question 1 is that we're going to need one way or another, and that's the CSE chairperson position. Is how would we like to address that? It's my recommendation, as I said before, to go back to the administrative model. The past 2 years, we've had we've had a model where it's stipended. We had the advantage of, having Lisa, who was certainly talented enough to be able to handle that position and do the child psychologist work at the same time. She knew the kids and she knew the teachers, and it was a wonderful advantage for us to have. But the disadvantage of that is we lost the amount of time that Lisa was able to spend with kids outside of CSE responsibilities. So she would have her CSE chair responsibilities, her CPSE chair responsibilities, her 504 chair responsibilities, along with any testing that she was required to do. So that reduced a lot of what Lisa would do outside the classroom, which is something we had enjoyed before when we had a CSE chairperson. The other part is a lot of those administrative pieces that ended up not being Lisa's ended up going to the principals. In the past 2 years, we haven't had the discipline load to worry about. We haven't had the day-to-day pieces in person in-house because we've been remote. So for the principal's workday, though they've been terribly busy with changes with COVID and the challenges of remote learning and working with teachers and students and parents and families, that all still existed. In person, we're going to add back the regular disciplinary load and all the challenges that are associated with generally as being as a principal at the elementary or the high school situation. So we also don't want to overdo it for our principals either. That's my recommendation.
The previous chairperson was a 10-month employee, and I'm assuming a stipend for a certain number of days in the summer. Is that how it was?
It was a 200-day position that we did. And some things it worked well with. In other places it had challenges because summer would be the time off, but there's a lot of work to do in the summer. It's like when was the best time to get your 200 days in, which is why we did more of a flex 200 days. And it also the salary reflected a 200-day reflection rather than a full, and it worked okay. Not as well as a 12-month position would, but it's certainly an option.
What are people's thoughts on how to proceed with the position?
So how do they compare fiscally, the financial piece?
The 12-month full position's the most expensive. We planned that out like we would have like a principal spot. So 75 to 85,000 plus benefit package that fits into there. The 200-day position was a little less, not by a lot. I want to say it fell between 70 and 80 was where that fell. It also changed a little bit on how vacations worked because you got to pick your time when you worked, or also you kind of had your vacation days you would bill on days you wouldn't work. That fit in plus benefits in there. So it wasn't a huge cost savings financially.
But how does that compare to the filling that with a school? They're hiring 2 school psychologists.
or?
School psychologist, we would,
Another counselor or whatever.
salaries would be just like a teacher. So, we plan teachers around $80,000 each. So on the high side, 2 psychologists would be $160,000.
But we're gonna hire one, so.
Yeah, so you're
So
gonna
really,
hire
we're just
one,
comparing, hiring one
Yeah,
school psychologist
so-
and the other being administrative
Right.
or.
point taken. So that's 80, so that's an additional 80 for the one. Now, if we have 2 CSE chair people, the second person's gonna need clerical support.
You have a full-time CSE secretary.
To work between 2 people in 2 offices and 2 locations.
It's one CSE.
But if you're gonna have 2 people,
It's still one CSE. It's still one list of students.
I mean, there's, right,
so what are you envisioning
No.
that to look like?
so I guess I'm a little confused, so you're saying that the 2 CSEs would be, in this case, potentially the 2 school psychologists? So what if, yeah, okay. I guess I hadn't necessarily been thinking of it that way, I mean, thinking one of them would do what our current school psychologist does, which is some of both, right? We know limited,
Yeah.
it's hard, there's only, only so many hours in the day.
So in essence, what you're thinking is the CSE, one psychologist we'd hire would be the CSE chairperson.
That's what I had,
And then the
I'm
second
not
person would
married
just be
to
a
it, I just-
psychologist.
Yeah, that's what I had in my
Okay.
head for no educated reason.
In that version, you wouldn't. I wouldn't think you would need a clerical support. In my head was 2 psychologists dividing the work with one
Oh, make it
elementary
easy.
level and high school level, in which case someone would need additional clerical support. But it didn't have to be that way. That's just what was in my head.
One of the things about sharing is that, especially the school psychologists, is you really can't share a meeting in which you've done any testing or observation. So you really would have to have somebody who could act as that neutral person to run the meeting while you were making your report. So if there were 2 psychologists, they would have to be co-chairs and they could just switch seats depending on who was the person
Yeah.
that was having contact with the student for preparation for
So-
that meeting.
So you're thinking more, it's not a job share, but you're thinking more of a job share type of a piece of where they're both co-chairs. So when my caseload shows up, you're the CSE, you're the chairperson for the meeting, so I can be psychologist. And when your caseload shows up, I take over.
The problem with separating the CSE into 2 distinct units means that you have double of everything. If
Right.
you keep it as one CSE, you have one person that's doing all of your notifications, one person that's doing all your scheduling, and that is your secretary, that's your linchpin position in that office. Somebody's going to be keeping all of those things together, and once you split it, then the danger is that stuff's going to get lost and certain things aren't going to be done, maybe you miss timelines. So you really do want to have some person that has continuous contact with that list and those services to make sure that notifications are going out,
Right.
things are being scheduled properly or correctly. So if you're sharing, my vision would be that person, and I did share that position, and it can be very fluid, because it's not a, your position reflects what your role in that meeting is, because you can wear many hats in some of those meetings. So it doesn't have to be difficult to share, and the CSE should not be separate. There should not be 2 operating CSE offices. That's, as kids
Which seems like
transition
inefficient,
between the
right?
2, there's too many opportunities for things not to go right.
So, I don't completely have I guess I don't necessarily know of the constraints. It seems to me that the individual people are gonna matter more than what we call them. We need a school psychologist.
Mhm.
And if we, right, and we need a CSE, somebody in charge of CSE. So then the question is, do we, is this the year to expand from that to either also have another school psychologist, counselor, whatever?
Another option is anybody who's operating in those remedial programs and the special service, in a service program, that person can also, you
Play
don't
that
have to, be a school psychologist, or
Right.
the person that I saw in my travels who did the job the best was trained as a school nurse teacher. She was just really great with people, and she just had an opportunity to learn her stuff, and she did it well. So it really doesn't require a certain position to do
Right.
it.
Well, it seems like in all those scenarios, really, the right person, kind
For the
of somewhat
person.
regardless. I mean, there's certain boxes you have to check. I mean, the school psychologist could be that the best
Could be.
case would be two. Could be that because of those, who those individuals were.
Mhm.
But that it would be right, because I mean, in the Venn diagrams that we've shown, there's a fair bit of overlap in some of the roles, right?
Right.
And so,
So I
I mean,
think,
that would be my perspective, would be having the right people.
right. And I think for our position is that, do we want to pursue another administrative position, or do we want to keep it as a stipend position to be determined amongst the positions that, you know, are here? I mean, we wouldn't be making that choice, it would be just the framework.
Right. So then, I guess I just to better understand, what are the advantages and disadvantages of one versus the other? Right, and some we've kind of alluded to, but it looks like money-wise, we're talking, do we feel like it's close to a wash-ish?
From the way Dr.
Yeah.
Glover presents it, yes, that there's
Yeah.
not a significant variation in the numbers to have the numbers drive.
I mean, over time, I guess it's easy for me to understand that over time. For a snapshot of this year, I think some of that would depend on, those salaries actually would make a difference, right?
Yeah.
Just as we look at this budget year, which is a little different than past budget years, so, trying to, what are some of the other advantages, disadvantages of those, from, I guess, the two perspectives I look at would be for the students, and then for board oversight, right? We have that role, so, from your perspective, what would be advantages, disadvantages from either of those, from student, what happens for students?
I did share the position, but I was never an administrator. So I don't really have that particular perspective. I do have the perspective of somebody who had to juggle both, the CSE responsibilities and the classroom, the student responsibilities. And what really drove my enjoyment of my job was working with the kids. So I really did like, being able to switch between the two, because it's challenging and in different realms. So, but I don't have that administrative component, and I don't know exactly what would be assigned to that administrator other than the CSE. Would there be other responsibilities that would be assigned to that administrator? What would they be?
Yeah, I would actually revert back to a job description I had before, where it would be, the CSE, CPSC 504, which is kind of the standard, but also oversight of the left services, English as second learners, oversight of those services, oversight of the homeless pieces, and kind of oversight of the RTI process. And the reason I put the RTI process in there is the end product for the student, where all the interventions, if they aren't working, ends up at the CSE chair's table. And then that way the CSE chair can say, these are the things I want to be able to see when we get here, when we start talking about intakes for kids, for evidence and the work and the things that we've done. And then give that person kind of control and oversight and direction from the very beginning of the intervention all the way to the point where everything we tried didn't work.
If it's an administrative position, who hires that person? Who makes that decision?
Same as principals.
That was what
Yeah.
I was thinking, but
Yeah.
I think it hasn't happened since I was on the board, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Though they're not it's not a line position, if you know what I mean. So, if there's a time where I'm not here and we need a number two, then depending on whether Julie or Karen are here, they would become number two on the situation. This is more of a support role that's there.
Would they be doing evaluations? Is there an administrator?
Yeah, we did have our last one do some, usually the special education staff and like of, any of our itinerants and then folks who come in who provide services.
So in that case, we wouldn't need to apply for a hardship for the hardship waiver for the evaluation?
Well, the hardship waiver in its part two is about having high school observe elementary and elementary observing high school.
Okay,
So that their need would still be there, but it would give us a fourth person to do observations if we needed help.
okay.
Is just doing what we did this year, do it again next year with a different person in that role, is that on the table, or is there strong feeling that that's not on the table? I mean, I don't see it as best case scenario, I just see this, just want to see what all our options are on the budget piece.
If that's,
And I don't have, I don't have a strong
well,
feeling
one,
one way or the
one
other.
of the things, and as far as, I did see that you're asking for another special education teacher, and it needs to be driven by students' needs, and you have to actually show that it's not because a child did not benefit from good instruction. So there are kids out there that even though they have gaps, you know, it could be very much, you know, related to their lack of direct instruction because of either remote or learning or whatever. So if that person is going to be involved in the response to intervention, then they're going to be very busy because they're going to be, if we have a lot of students that are going to be receiving those intervention services, they all have to be tracked, and because they all have to be determined at what tier they receive their services, and that needs to all be data driven. So to be done correctly, you really do need to have somebody really watching that data and making sure that there are regular adjustments to those student services. You can't pick a service at the beginning of the year and have it shouldn't still be the same at the end. So somebody needs to monitor that, and if somebody's doing that, I think it would be, to be consistent, I think especially in the upcoming year, would be helpful to have somebody consistently watching that, make sure that data is collected appropriately, because you should be
So
programmed
when
every 10
you,
days.
and just to show clear, so that person being either the CSC chair or the administrator who's in that,
Well, the CSC chair probably would not be doing the response to intervention with the
so the
administrator.
administrator or,
Who is doing the CSC chair, that person acting as an administrator.
and if we didn't go that route, then that would be, who's
It would be
doing it then?
principals, I would
Principals
assume
and
would
that, right?
be monitoring. Or a team, they would have, you know, but the principals would be, you know, involved there too.
Yep.
So it would help to, at least my understanding of how it should operate should lighten, it should be able to distribute the load across the three instead of the two that have been carrying it.
With the increased need this year.
Right,
Part of that.
exactly.
No,
And
that's-
it's going to be increased need.
Right, no, without a doubt.
Jackie, Heidi, have you anything to add?
So I guess my thought, I'm kind of going back and forth between having two psychologists. I feel like we could provide more services for our students directly. However, I do know if we have the CSE, I mean, I think the RTI is very important, and previously I don't think it was done correctly or consistently from our previous one. So I guess I'm kind of in the middle.
Are you done, Jackie? So I guess my concerns, my only concerns about the CSE position is that if we split it, it needs to be very clear who handles what so that things don't get dropped or things don't get, you know, not taken care of. But I don't know how you make that work with, if we do two psychologists, are they specifically responsible for certain groups of students? so that we make sure that things don't get dropped between going back and forth, or I don't know. I guess it depends on how it would work. I think it would just have to be a very clear role.
I'll kind of pick up on what Heidi says, and and I'm new to understanding all of this, so I appreciate the discussion just to get into that. But I would tend to kind of agree a little bit with Heidi, having worked in a position where I kind of had, it was a little different, I had two bosses, it's just hard to understand. And when there's a lot of need, I feel like folks who can be focused on one or the other, it seems like they could potentially better serve the students in need. And just in my, kind of cutting it up, two psychologists splitting, it sounds like you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it, you're splitting up two people in half. And it may be some of my not completely understanding it, that role, but it just seems like it would make more sense to
So
have.
I have a quick question just about timing, because if it's close to budget neutral, then it isn't really a budget discussion, it's a different discussion. Is that a discussion we need to have tonight, based on the timing of hiring?
I think we just need to identify whether we're going to advertise for the administrative position or,
Okay, because it isn't really a budget discussion, but that's okay if we need to have it tonight because of the timing, right? If we're saying it's going to cost, they're both going to cost a similar amount of money, then just because we're talking about budget stuff, I guess I don't know. I sort of got us dragged on that tangent, but maybe by timing, right? Because we have, my understanding is that was advertised and it's going to close here in a week for one position. Although I guess that would give us. I don't have a clear understanding when we feel like we would need to make that decision. I mean, we have applicants, and so.
If now that we're a little bit more harmonized on where the dual psychologist role is, now that piece becomes part of whatever psychologist we have is just informing those people who apply what those expectations are going to be to there. So to that end, it's like, yeah, we could say, if this is where we're going to head, it's not as much of a budget thing at this point. We just need a tough structure. If we're talking about administratively, it's a little more. It's in there, but remember, one of those positions are in.
One of those positions are in?
Yeah, so like the school psychologist, well, actually, no, if we were to do two school psychologists, right, it would be, we have a psychologist salary in there because for Lisa, and then we have the other that is set for CSE. So I guess you're right, that wouldn't be the case. It would just be about advertising and hiring at that point.
I mean, right. I mean, if we were advertising two positions right now instead of one, would we likely get more applicants? I'm guessing that there's probably, maybe we would, but I'm guessing that there's not many people who would say, I'm not going to apply for one because I don't think that I'll win, I'll get the job. But if they're hiring for two, then I would put my name in. Meaning, I think we're already going to have a pool for two. I guess I'm arguing that I don't know that we need to make this, spend more time on this decision. I think it's more discussion, but if we have the budget piece, and this is budget neutral, then we can either, I think my thought is this decision doesn't need to be made tonight, although I guess we don't meet again until the end of April, right? So that's the other piece is that we don't have a regular April meeting till the end of April.
And that cuts me close on, because I haven't done anything for any advertising for CSE chairperson at all, pending for there. We knew we were going to need a psychologist, so I went ahead with the psychologist. And plus, there's competition out there this year. There's 3 other school districts that are looking, so we threw a name in the hat quickly.
I see your point, Bob, but I do think that it would help us to form some of the other discussions as we move forward, what kind of format we would like to use. I think would help people to understand how they're going to move forward. So, in thinking about it, I do think that having one particular person, and you're right, Dan, part of it's chemistry too. It's how two people work together.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works really, really well, and other times you do have to spend a lot of energy, to make it happen. So, I would support, you know, the CSE chairperson position if that person was doing CSE, preschool CSE 504 and response to intervention and the other responsibilities that you outlined, which was the homeless and the extended language ones. But I also think that it should be the 200-day as opposed to the full-time.
So how about this? So, not to kick the can down the road, but we have already have the positions open for school psychologists. We could open a position for an administrator, but we still could, we're gonna have a bunch of school psychologists consider. I mean, at the end of the day, for me, it's really about the people, because I think that there's a couple different, you know, you put your best team together and to some degree figure out who's gonna do what, right? So, so if both of those positions are opened and we're gonna meet again in April, and, you know, we look and see who we have for candidates.
Exactly.
Right, and then we can, I mean, you can have preliminary discussions with those people, and we wouldn't have discussions with other people, but we would, right, until further in the process, or not at all, depending on if it was two school psychologists. Right, so we can kind of go down both these roads and with the intention of
So you'd have me advertise anticipated on the administrative one, or do I wait until?
it's a good question, I don't.
I mean, that's the other piece. Because you figure for the administrative piece with the break in there, well, it'll probably be, if we were to post it before break, it would probably be the end of April before we would have an ending date be there, and then work May and June to have someone ready for July, or depending if they're already sitting somewhere else, it might be early August.
I mean, I guess I feel like we kind of need to get both balls rolling here, right? So, and in the back of our minds, we can be thinking, okay, we got a couple different options, and some it depends on, because it isn't really budget, right? I mean, if it's close to cost neutral,
But
it's super important. I don't mean to downplay it at all. I just think that if we're thinking about the budget piece, it's kind of separate from a budget discussion. It's I guess I just don't feel like I have enough information to feel real strongly. I can certainly see the advantage of I can see the advantage of both, right? I mean, I can see the advantage of if we had two school psychologists, because even having one who lots of her time was you know, well, at least this time is CSE chair time, but there is some school psychologist time that she also has in her schedule. And so then that frees up that other person to have more student time.
I guess with the school psychologist, if we went to school psychologists, I still think we really need to define, you know, is this person going to be just elementary, this person just going to be high school? Because I'm concerned that you're going to have a drop of stuff if they're trying to go back and forth between doing the psychologist job and doing the CSE chair, and then somebody else is also doing that same thing. I think it would be tricky. I think it would have to be the right people and the right definition of the position, I think.
100%. Agreed.
I mean, could we advertise for a CSE person and a school psychologist? And what happens if we find two school psychologists that we like? Could we talk to them about maybe changing that CSE position if we didn't find the CSE person that we liked? Just to get the ball rolling?
I think that's, yeah, I'm about keeping options open there depending on who applies and.
Because it's definitely about the right person. I mean, this is an important
Absolutely.
position. Both of them.
100%.
All right, so if this is something that we still want to, because this is really the first time we've actually had an opportunity to talk about it, and we still don't have, you know, we may still have some questions. If we, at this particular point, decide to leave the higher amount in the budget that covers the administrative position and the school psychologist, and then we can have that discussion go forward?
Do you think if we decided tonight on the two school psychologists that we should have a lower number in the budget?
yes. I think in order to cover that administrative component, it would cost more than, say, a school psychologist that had a few years under her belt or something like that.
Even
I
at
mean,
the
for
200
this-
days, Ann?
A school psychologist would be different than the 200 days. It would have to be a memorandum to do a certain
No, but
number of days.
What I'm saying is you think that a school psychologist, or that I guess what I'm saying is, so at a 200-day CSC person, like administrative, you think they wouldn't be the same as a school psychologist, like price-wise?
I think that somebody with that administrative degree would probably cost us it would be a little more money than a school psychologist.
Even not at a full-time, but at a 200-day schedule.
Well, the school psychologist would be covered under the WADA
Yeah, right.
contract, and the CSC chairperson would be a terms and condition person, so there would be a different, we would have to go with the numbers in WADA's, the way they negotiated the contract as far as the years of experience and, their salary level dictated by that contract, as opposed to the terms and conditions where we might have to negotiate that number a little more.
Gotcha. I was just thinking that they would almost be relatively similar, but maybe not. I could be completely
And
out of.
very much could be. Because if you have somebody who has a lot of experience and is
Right.
a really good match, then you pay for that experience. And that does make it more comparable in the money. So that's why I said if we just leave the higher amount, that gives us the option
Yeah.
to take a look at. But it is, as Bob points out, a budget discussion. So it's really, how much do we want to spend? And because there are other questions that we have to address tonight. So it's unfortunate, this is the first time we're having this conversation about the structure. And, I think anything that you can provide Dr. Glover that would give us a clearer picture as to how that person would operate in the position if it were an administrative position as opposed to a shared position between somebody in the WADA under the contract. That would be, that would help us to understand if you had to build in stipends and, how you would think that would work. That would help us to have a clearer picture.
Okay. So that leads to, let's just follow the right trail. Summer.
What about it?
How would we like to proceed?
Well, actually, I think $60,000 is a bargain. So whatever, that's why I asked how you would break that down. Because based on what I did read in your plan, I'm not sure that you could get what you were suggesting for $60,000 if you're throwing in transportation and, the cost of operations. So, and would our principals be overseeing that as well?
Overseeing what?
Summer school?
Well, for the elementary here, it would be principal here. Going to
Right.
would be the site.
But we don't know what that would look like. It's just that we would budget $60,000 to cover summer services.
Yeah.
I think it's bargain.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
Okay, so what about our staffing for next school year? In terms of the recommended positions for additional support?
One of the things that would really help me to make this decision is if there was some data to support it. I mean, I know you've told us how many kids are at risk, but I'm not sure at the high school especially. We have other positions and just what the numbers would look like. And I do know the math position existed. It was Peters. When he retired in 2008, it disappeared. So that, because it was the gap elimination year, and it makes sense. But as far as the other ones, I don't really know if we have somebody doing the response to intervention, just what that would look like.
We can regather that information for you. For the time being, we'll leave that out.
Okay.
And I'll get it, I think what I'll do is I'll get information gathered to you and we'll get it to you separate from a board meeting for you to review it.
Okay.
Because if you're gonna wanna talk about getting it added into the budget, there's some additional things we're probably gonna wanna talk about, which would be another budget workshop. Because I don't think we wanna talk about it on the meeting in April and approve the budget in April on the same
No.
day. So.
Has there been any more discussion from the state or the federal government about funding for making up for the lost year? Or, I know I heard something about, there would be funding for new programs to help, with kids who are failing, kids who are struggling, those kind of things. Is there any of that being talked about?
Yeah, I just sat through a very long webinar on the CDC department, in the Federal Department of Education today about the new regs, and there was a lot of conversation about a new package coming. But a lot of that was about supplemental work, not, so like new things to add in, so
Right.
there may be opportunity there, Heidi. But remember, if we end up getting like a federal grant that would fulfill a position, that the board can always accept that grant and increase the budget after the budget is set. And then it's a 100% grant funded position, and it's just with the the full knowledge that if the grant disappears, so does the position, unless the board chooses to absorb that.
But would this be something that, would that cover like additional AIS positions? Or would it have to be a whole new position altogether?
Nah, it depends on how they would break things out. We'll get that in guidance if that ever comes to fruition.
Okay.
But generally, it's, for the past couple of years, that phrase supplement, not supplant, has been very big in federal funds. Is that they don't only taking federal money and using it to replace local money to maintain operations. They want you to do it to enhance what they want you to work on.
Right. Well, it just might be something that could benefit us this year.
Yeah. We may not see it by the budget, we may see it afterward, but that doesn't mean we still could take advantage of it if it showed up afterward.
Right. Okay.
Propositions. Those are here. I'll reshare here. Or let me pull that up. Just give me 1 second. Oh, hi everybody. Oops. So, prepositions, can you, why is it sharing that? On my screen it says that I'm sharing a Word document, and that screen it's showing my...
It looks like WebEx is almost on that one.
Oh, I know why. So, hold on.
I can see it.
Yeah, I know, Jackie, I know, I just realized what I
Okay.
did. I got on the other computer up something different. So there. Thanks, so prepositions, the budget is always, here, and let me, see if I can make this a little bigger. Is that better?
That's it, thank you.
So budget's always the first proposition, it's always there. 2, we currently have listed bus proposition. Before Rich joined us, I had a conversation with Lynn, and Lynn said there is a way that we could roll the bus proposition, or the bus leases, into the budget proposition, so it's one proposition and not 2. It's just, we have to talk with our bond council, and I can talk with Rich about that. I think if we can do that, it would be to our benefit, because too many propositions get confusing, that are up there. But buses, we'll keep the buses. We've talked about doing a capital reserve, or creating a capital reserve. Remember, in capital reserves, it is completely voter controlled. So we create the reserve, the board can set what it wants for a limit for how much money can go into that reserve. And then if it needs to get expended, it needs the voters' approval to expend it. That's there. So we had one prior to this budget. We have had conversations before, just briefly, about creating another one to, to kind of plan for the future, for future projects out. I know the 1.2 million we had into one for this budget helped us quite a bit. So we just got to decide if we want to do that or not. And then the library I'm going to hold for a second. Dan, thank you, reminded me about the student board member seat. So on my notes page, we'll have the student board member seat on here as well, and then the libraries, of course, the libraries. 2 3-year spots open, and that's Jackie's and Heidi's spot for this year. But that looks like where we're planning for propositions. Any thoughts? Any questions?
I have a specific question
Okay.
on Proposition 2.
Okay.
And I guess I'm interested in a more rigorous look at lease versus buy, just to understand it. I'm not saying that buying is better. I just don't feel like when that decision was made that we really had a good understanding of all the implications of that decision. And some of this is just based on having looked at lease versus buy in a number of scenarios with clients, and it's rarely as much of a no-brainer as that looked to be. It seemed like it was too good to be true. And so is there a piece that comes into play that levels that a little bit? I'm not sure.
Okay, we'll make them get you more information.
Perfect.
Because transportation does show up in several different lines, so.
Yeah, and I just noticed, number of neighbors do different things, and we had made that switch. It was such a no-brainer. I feel like everybody would have, unless we're just a lot smarter, which is possible. And so, but I wanted to understand any implications of that.
Okay.
That buy versus lease decisions. I mean, I think we all agreed on the student member, right?
Yeah.
And we wanted to.
It was that. Like I said, I didn't update or switch out my notes page for this page. I have it on my notes page.
Yep. No, that's fine. Yeah. No, I it's intentional. I just was
Yep.
making sure that we were confirming that we were all
Yes.
on board.
Okay. Jackie, Heidi, any questions here?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, let's some thumbs up, Heidi. Thanks. The last, unless Rich tells me we have anything else to worry about, is our budget hearing. We haven't set officially the budget hearing, and I need a date because we need to put it into the legal notice. that goes out and it goes out for 4 days. It is somewhere between the 4th of May and 11th of May. Now, since we had the 1 year where we had the budget hearing before the newsletter got to everybody because of some mailing issues, we've looked to keep the public hearing on the budget as close to the end of that time as we possibly could, which would be the 11th. But the 6th would also work, I think.
I'm just looking.
Okay,
So the vote's the 18th,
right?
and the 11th is the week before.
Yes. It's the you have to have it no later than 7 days prior to the budget vote.
You said the 6th as opposed to the 4th, the Thursday?
The
Yeah.
6th as opposed to the 11th.
6th or the 11th, I thought would be good dates. I just don't want us to run into the 4th is a little tight because if we're going to have the newsletter done, it's got to go to print and we need to collect the mail. And then how long does it take to get to people's mailboxes? And we don't. I
Or
don't
it just
wanna-
sits in the post office and nobody gets it anyways.
Yeah, well, I would like to do our best to try to avoid that as best we can, which is why I tend to lean a little later in the time frame. I think the 4th too, we have an committee meeting on that date. I think.
6th or the 11th work for me, whichever.
I can do the 6th.
I can do either one.
Yeah, you can do it.
Okay, so Jackie, the 6th is your only day?
Yes.
Okay, 6th it is. 6 o'clock. Just to stay
Yep.
consistent with time.
Dave,
And
will
that
voting
is-
take place how we normally have done it, or are there going to be like the mail-in ballots and stuff? Have you heard?
At this time, we're back to normal. We're back to in-person voting. I think the biggest question is what part of the district do we bring people to? We used to have it in the front lobby, but then there were some concerns with stairs or folks who had to go out back and walk around. So then we moved it to the primary building in the gym, but we didn't have folks come in the end, the outside edge, to prevent parking problems. And so we could control access in and out. We had a lot of people upset because they couldn't get in those doors and they had to walk all the way around. So we just need to find a space that handicap accessibility is easier and that everyone can get to.
How about
There's
the
not
gym?
anything on the circle side of the building that people, like, could we turn a classroom into a voting room for a day?
Maybe.
Like right there at the circle?
Yeah, and that's a good thought, Heidi. We'll take a look and see.
People could park in the high school parking lot for that day, and then it leaves room for voters to park and people to get in and out easier.
Yep, and through the circle, and it's handicapped accessible, and it's not a long walk.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think people will be much happier than trying to walk all the way around into that elementary building.
Yeah, because we had a few folks upset.
Yes.
And while we try not to make people upset at all, the budget day is certainly one of those days. We put a little extra energy. Okay, Rich, did you have anything, or principals, did you guys have anything to bring to the board's attention?
No, I am all set.
Okay, looks like we're good for budget. Unless the board has something else.
And it's just your building project?
Yep, building project. I still don't have information on cameras fully, and I still don't have the information on the enhancement yet, so I'm right now of the opinion it's probably gonna have to wait till phase 2.
Well, actually, I do believe that our attorneys would tell us that the best course of action would be for us to finish this one. And even if there were things that could be done and they weren't gonna cost even any additional money, we should take it back out to the voters just to let people know what we're doing so that,
Okay.
we keep them separate. So, based on their recommendation, it would be mine to say, recommendation to say that we close out this project. We get all of
Okay.
the work done and get everything signed off by the architects and everything, and
Out of
make sure
curiosity-
that we're in line to get that building A.
Okay, out of curiosity, which attorney did you talk to?
Chris Lanchian.
Chris? Okay. Because Pat told me that there would be room to be able to do that based on the proposition. Okay, then that wraps that up. Now, Rich, did you hear that? Yep, okay.
Yes, I did.
And then, planning for another, well, we don't have a capital reserve, so we do need to start that whole conversation. I just don't think that in the time we have between now and the time things have to go for a proposition, we have time to actually do that. So if we're going to do something like that, we can have a special election if we want to do it before next year.
Well, if we are, let's say if we're gonna go out for phase 2 and it's gonna go back out to voters and with another phase, that would be a perfect time to put another type of reserve out and just do it at that time. Okay.
Well, right, it makes sense to start the thought process immediately, right? And we're
Yeah.
independently.
Yep, oh, absolutely. This isn't anywhere near as big of a number, but,
Right.
it's still months of planning and conversations and,
And architects and
yep.
sign-offs and
It is-
approvals and,
Yeah, it'll still take a year to come around.
Right. No, well, that's fine. I mean, it's good we came in under budget. We've got to do a lot of stuff and.
Something to, be very proud of. That,
Absolutely.
We're not looking for additional monies to pay that on, so
Right,
it's a good place to be.
absolutely.
But speaking about that, as far as wrapping it up, you did share with us about the fencing. What is the plan for the area that they're using out there as a staging area as they clean their way out of that? Are they going to fence all of that in, or how are they going to handle cleaning themselves out of there so it doesn't look like a wasteland?
Well, we can talk about how we want that to look. I think the current plan is the fence is going with them, and they were
Okay.
leaving us with a parking lot.
Okay,
Which has its advantages because we can, we can use some storage space for some things, that's there. That's the current plan. Clean up along the side where, the other side of it where it came in and out and make things look the way they were in there. If we want, if we wanted to say, we want this cleaned up, we want the stone out, we want it back, we want to replant trees there, we can do that too.
do you anticipate if this fence doesn't take us all the way out to the property line? It just takes us to the end of the securities line?
Yeah, it just takes it reconnects it back up. It's just that line of fence that's there.
Would we not put fencing out to the end of the school property?
There is fencing that goes out along that way, but it doesn't, from where it's not highlighted, all the way over to the where the red line is. That's to be able to drive back to that dirt area where like the recycling bin is and the garbage is and all that. So that area is not fenced.
But I'm saying, as we restore our own, as they move out and we're restoring back to our own line, would we not want fencing to go all the way out?
Oh yeah, we could. And that would probably be a piece of the, added as another conversation in that extra money is to, restoring the fence back out, because maybe you want to replace the whole fence. In which case.
So there is fencing, but you said
Yeah,
it's taking the fence.
there is fencing that goes that goes out back and behind into there. There is fencing out there.
Okay. So this, what you're suggesting in yellow,
Is replacing the part that was damaged and got removed, yes. 'Cause that's the area that was the neighbor's concern with folks walking through that trail that's kind of in the middle, that wooded area with some damage and littering issues.
So from the top of that highlighted line, from that point, our property goes to the left, not up, correct? So that little trapezoid up the top belongs to the school. Is that correct?
I would,
is that where the bus
This
garage?
up here, right?
No, yes, that piece right that Dan's pointing to. No, I'd say the bus garage is
I would have to
off
relook
to the
at,
right.
I would have to relook at the survey map to know exactly about.
Because the chain link fence doesn't match one of those black lines, so I don't know if it's a property line or not.
So I'm pretty certain from looking at a property map that the school's line is that yellow line and then goes to the left at
On the
less than a 90-degree angle. So that
Yeah.
piece right
It
here
may,
belongs, the school property is all this and then that piece there.
yes.
So just as far as if we're thinking about
Clary's
where the,
do own their own barn. In that case is theirs. There's a stone wall.
right, but I'm talking up here, not there, right? This is Clary piece, this is the.
Yeah, I'm there and at the top. I'm not wondering if that line there is, there's a stone fence that goes out behind the back part of Clary's property. I'm not wondering if that's that.
Because I think
Well, it's
then,
identified as a stone wall, but it's along their line. Bob's
Yes.
looking up higher towards the top of the map.
I think it like up in,
I mean, I think we,
because it says chain link fence, right?
that's a little- that was a little different than my previous understanding. Let's see if I can pull up
it doesn't necessarily matter right now. But just as far as where the fence goes, it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to put a fence across our own property. We put it
Right. Should be,
as a border if we think it's necessary.
so is there anything else that,
No, if we're gonna kind of say what we've got is done, everything else will go onto that other list for conversation. Then it's just a matter of, making sure Rich gets what he needs, before that May 1st date to have it there. And I can let the schoolhouse folks know. And, then we'll just roll with the summer and whatever additional costs we incur or don't incur, we will, go from there. And then adjust our final numbers accordingly and be in time to get that, to get the financing taken care of.
and we do have a meeting on the 14th. And could we work out the difficulty with who's hosting the meeting so that
Yeah.
we don't have a half-hour delay?
Yeah, well, I think what happened there is I talked to Gina about everyone being able to come in and be a host. And so that I have to ask her what she did. I'm not sure. So she might have clicked off that whoever comes in can be the host, and that turned it off everyone from being able to be a host. So we'll find the middle. We'll get it.
Yes, and maybe we can make Dan the host then.
Yeah. So,
I'm not a host anymore, Gina's back in, so,
She's back.
would you?
yeah, so it just automatically gave her the host.
Does anybody else have any questions or concerns for Dr. Glover or Rich as far as the budget is concerned?
So are we thinking another workshop that we haven't scheduled?
We set a meeting on the 14th for the reopening.
For the reopening plan, so that'll also then be
Well,
the
then
reopening
we
plan
have our regular meeting.
on the 27th, but I thought we,
27th.
Yeah, 27th is the day that the board's going to need to adopt the budget.
right, so I think there had been reference to another workshop,
Yes. You got a couple things that aren't
so
tied up.
should we set that right now?
Sure.
So next week's probably too soon, and then the following week is break. That next week, I mean, we're already on the 14th, but that would work well for me, because the following week's gonna be a tough one, so. If we did something else, of course, well, we can be, oh, the 12th is already set to be a couple committee meetings.
Want to do like the 13th or the 15th, you're thinking, or tack it on the 14th? Seems like a lot.
It does seem like fun. I kind of think, I guess the 15th would be I could make the 13th work. Less convenient than the 15th. What are others' thoughts on?
Are you available on the 15th?
Yep.
Heidi, Jackie, are you available on the
So-
15th?
So that week is my break. So we have a meeting already the 14th. So and we're looking at doing what on the 15th as well?
Well, just, so having finishing the budget discussion so we know what we're doing going into the 27th, right? So we have to adopt it on the 27th.
Is it possible to meet earlier and block out the specific area of time, like from 5 to 6 to do the budget and then the reopening plan at 6? On that day, on the 14th, or do people want to keep those separate?
I mean, I could, so the 22nd would be a week later, I could work, are we getting close, is that too close to the 27th? To, if there's, unless we're just making decisions, not changes that need
Right.
time to look into.
Yeah, and that's the piece of it. If the 22nd we can get resolved, you know, if we can get everything resolved, then we're good. Or if we get there, we see everything and everyone's comfortable with where the budget falls, then we're good.
Whatever, I'll make it work. Whatever works for everybody else. I'm gone the 16th though. I'm leaving for a few days.
Are you available on the 22nd?
Yeah, 22nd's good. I'm back in school that week.
Okay. Jackie, are you available on the 22nd?
I can do the 22nd.
Yeah, okay. 22nd work for you, Ron?
Yep.
Okay, 6 o'clock? Okay. Budget workshop on the 22nd?
That's right there.
Yeah. And does anybody have anything that they specifically would like to see from Dr. Glover as far as, or Rich, as far as the budget's concerned? As far as So other than
Yep.
those four,
You've outlined, you've outlined.
Yeah. Here's what I have. Prior to that meeting, just some of the compare and contrast with money and job responsibilities about CSE and psychologists, which will probably become part of the conversation then. We need to add summer in to the budget. You want to see some more data about the school, from the school years about the high school and the elementary and those pieces. Buses, Bob was looking for more information just with the purchase versus buy, just a more rigorous look. Was there, we set the budget.
Purchase versus lease.
Yeah, purchase versus lease. Oh, yeah. Purchase versus buy. I'm doing great.
Pretty similar.
Budget hearing set for the 6th, and the next workshop's on the 22nd. I miss anything? Nope, that's pretty close. We're pretty close.
just allow the host to be able to open the meeting at 6
Yep,
o'clock.
and just work out our technical kinks.
Well, actually, it was 2 hours from the time it started.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much, so. Okay.
Officially adjourned?
Workshop adjourned, I guess. Not really a meeting, so thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.